listening to the Patriot Nation Podcast.
All right, welcome into another edition of the Patriot Nation Podcast. Of course, a proud member of the CLNS group of podcasts. It's your boy, Pat Lane, as always, with my guy, Matt St. Jean. And today we are joined by everyone's favorite Patriots writer, definitely everyone's favorite Karen Reed writer, for sure. It is the one, the only Jerry Thornton. Jerry, thanks so much for coming on with us.
Well, listen, Pat and Matt, thanks. That's high praise indeed. There's a lot of top quality Karen Reed writers out there. I'm just the guy who feels like I can sort through all the confusion between there are 12 people named Brian and 37 bald cops and the different law enforcement agency, and for the crying out loud, who butt dialed whom exactly, and why was that couple claiming they butt dialed each other while making love at 2:30 in the morning? Sorry, you're a married couple. There's no way. But anyway, yeah. Thanks, fellas. I deeply appreciate you inviting me on. This will be a fun conversation. For that, I have no doubt.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, it will be. All right, let's get, you know what? There's mandatory minicamp going on, and there's also the Patriots kind of news-ish going on. But we're skipping all of that crap right now. We don't want to talk about the 2025 Patriots. We want to talk about the 2003 Patriots. And so, Matt, we're going to have you start off, sir, and give us some context for this first game, the fifth game in the 21-game win streak.
The date is November 3rd, 2003. So we're getting into November here. Schedule getting tougher. Week 9, Patriots got to go on the road to Invesco Field at Mile High Stadium. Monday Night Football on ABC. You got linebacker Al Wilson for the Broncos, mic'd up for sound. This is a big, big, big game. This is a Broncos team that actually started off the year 4-1. They won their first 4 games. Jake Plummer gets hurt. Steve Berline comes in. Then he gets hurt. So they're 5-3 coming into this one with third stringer Danny Cannell starting, who was in the Arena Football League the year before. He would lose his first start that year, the week before in Baltimore. This game would be his last ever NFL start. Getting the start for the Patriots will include Dan Klecko with Richard Seymour out. Some notable Broncos on this team. Clinton Portis is the year before he gets traded. Rod Smith, Shannon Sharp in the last year of his career. Ashley Lilly was on this team. I don't know why that name always stuck out to me. And then Ed McCaffrey, who was inactive for this game, but he was on that Broncos team. Patriots had lost to the Broncos in each of the last 2 seasons. That was, Brady's kind of first nightmare performance in 2001 when he goes to Denver and throws a bunch of picks and things kind of disintegrate for him. The Patriots lose at home in 2002 when they, I think, first debuted, or the second time they debuted the all-blue uniforms. They decided to break those out against the Broncos. So this is a team that they had not played well against. Head coach there's Mike Shanahan. Broncos favored by 2 points. And one other note I had watching this one, the rare Bill Belichick red hoodie appearance, which obviously is something that would become known for worse things later on. But at this point in Patriots history, it's a good thing.
Yeah, that red hoodie still gives me PTSD, but not because of what happened in this game, but obviously later on. And I don't know how much you guys have really set this up, but, we're talking about the 2003 team, which, the jury was very much out at this point because 2002, they had missed the playoffs, and, it was just kind of this thought, general consensus was, okay, Cinderella turned back into a pumpkin, to use the lame old cliche. Maybe they're not that great a team or whatever. They started out 2-2. They had, a couple of impressive wins, but only just against teams that they were heavily favored against, whatever. We really didn't know what we had and what we were in the beginning stages of. And this didn't come up in that dynasty series on Apple TV, where they took the 2003 and the 2004 season and reduced them to 10 seconds and 2 highlights. What we were in the beginning stages of were the 2 greatest back-to-back seasons in NFL history.
Yeah.
And again, the dynasty reduced that to, and they won the Super Bowl. Then the next, 2 more years, they won the Super Bowl. And then disaster struck. You know what I mean? What are we doing here? Well, what we didn't realize at the time was this was an absolutely next level defense that should go down as one of the great defenses in NFL history. And Brady, going from the caretaker quarterback that he was portrayed as in 2001, and just starting to emerge as the guy who's going to carry a team when it needs to be carried.
100%. And to your point, Jerry, right? The Patriots have gone 11-9 since winning the Super Bowl in 2001. We talked about leading into the first game, or the Titans game. They had gone 7 straight games without scoring a touchdown in the first quarter. They were a mediocre, middling team, right? And they got blown out the first week against the Bills. Of course, Tom Jackson famously says that the Patriots hate their coach and everything else like that. And so you're right. This was very much a team that, was, I wouldn't say in turmoil necessarily, but I think you're right in the fact that there were a lot of kind of questions surrounding them. And they had won 4 straight going into this. But none of those games you really looked at and said, oh, yeah, the Patriots are just out there mowing people down. Really, that's not the way that they won games, the first half of the, of the streak for the most part. And so even though they had won 4 in a row, you're going in to a place that they just have always sucked in Denver for whatever reason. Brady's his whole career, he struggled against Denver, even when they weren't very good. And, you're going up against Mike Shanahan, another great coach. And so you wonder, what are we going to get out of this game? And you get one of, and maybe not for the whole thing, but to me, you get one of those super memorable games and one of the most memorable moments maybe in the entire dynasty, I think. And so, really kind of turns into a fascinating game.
Sure. And the week before, they faced stop me if you've heard this, the Browns were not a good team. I know that's not an expression that exactly rolls off the tongue. You rarely hear that. But they played them at home, and they beat them 9-3. And I may have misspoke earlier when I said, they played like Buffalo and Houston, who weren't particularly great teams, and they gave up north of 30 points, but still won. So, yeah, that's where they were at in this was a whole, what exactly are these guys? Is Brady really all that good? He was just kind of like a guy who caught lightning in a bottle. Again, I'm going to try not to use cliches, but they keep rolling off the tongue because we're talking about a 2003 game. And that's when we always talk to that kind of nonsense.
Yep.
Well, I think that segues us into this nicely because this is not a good game for Tom Brady at the start. First 2 possessions for the Patriots end in turnovers. The first one, Brady fumbles a snap, which this is not the only time we saw that pop up as an issue at this point in the season. In Miami, it also happened. Brady fumbles a snap. Clinton Portis takes it into the end zone a couple plays later for the first quarter touchdown the Patriots allowed since week 1. Then Brady throws a pick on the next drive. Broncos end up missing a field goal after that, so it doesn't turn into points. And then this is where Tom Brady starts to show up. First play of the next drive, 66-yard touchdown over the top of the defense to Deion Branch. And that's kind of when this game starts to go back and forth. Teams trade field goals. Somehow, led by Danny Cannell, the Broncos totally kill the clock in the second quarter and drive all the way down the field and score a touchdown with under 30 seconds to go. Then Bethel Johnson returns a kick. The Patriots are able to get a field goal. So, it's just total chaos in the first half.
Matt, that was a 16-play, 72-yard drive that took over 7 minutes off the clock to what looked like end the first half with them, taking a decently commanding lead, not a super commanding lead,
17-10.
Right,
yeah.
Taking a 17-10 lead into halftime. And to your point, Bethel Johnson returns the ensuing kickoff 63 yards. when the Patriots, I think they completed a pass to Kevin Falk and then kicked the field goal to end the half. And so, ends up being 17-13 instead of 17-10. And that makes such a huge difference.
Boy, if that Bethel Johnson didn't absolutely earn his draft status, what a great move that turned out to be. I think we just mentioned all of his career highlights in the last.
What's interesting is that he actually had, in the return game, he was a terrible receiver. He had one really nice long catch. I think there was the one. But in the return game, he was a pretty good returner for a few years. Not worthy of a second-round pick. But
not worthy of keeping on the roster. You know what I mean?
Correct.
They've had guys who were nothing but a kick returner and were worth eating up a roster spot with him. And I think at the time we're all saying, okay, he didn't work out, but you know what?
This next guy definitely will.
This next wide receiver we draft, he's going to be the guy. And along came Chad Johnson, and then eventually Tyquan Thornton, and then eventually I lost all hope.
Maybe there's hope again for Kyle Williams, but that's a different discussion for another day.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely different discussion. I'm gonna learn to love again, fellas. I've been burned. Eventually, but someone's ready to come in and fill this, Chad Jackson, hole in my heart.
Lord.
We get into the third quarter of this one. Patriots eventually get on top here. Brady hits Daniel Graham for a touchdown, and then special teams gives it up pretty shortly thereafter. Deltha O'Neal returns a punt for a touchdown. Broncos take the lead. Patriots drive down, get back within one with a field goal. And this is what ends up kind of setting up the final sequence. Something I had not realized about this game is that the Broncos kicker is actually hurt during this game. So the Broncos are unable to try to go for a field goal to extend the lead. They pin the Patriots deep. Patriots can't do anything with it. And that's the intentional safety that sets up the Patriots in field position to go on a game-winning drive that ends with a touchdown to David Givens in the best game he had at that point in his career.
Yeah. If I can backtrack just a second, Matt, I think a kind of a theme that runs through this game is mistakes and then teams capitalizing on those mistakes. You mentioned the two Brady turnovers right at the beginning of the game. He fumbles, it turns into a touchdown by the Broncos. He throws a pick. The Broncos miss a field goal. What do the Patriots do on the very next play? Throw a touchdown pass, right? You mentioned the Deltha O'Neal punt return for touchdown. That was actually the second consecutive punt. They punted the first time with no return whatsoever, but there was holding by Nalani Paxton on that play. They had to punt it again. Turns out being a crap punt instead of a good punt. It was 37 yards instead of 47 yards. They pushed back 10 more yards, and Deltha O'Neal takes it back for a touchdown. Patriots had just taken the lead for the first time in the game. And so you look at those things and you're just looking at it saying, like, man, if we could just, both teams, they could just get out of their own way and stop making stupid mental errors, that's when you could win. And that's exactly what happens, right? The Patriots get in this situation at the 1 yard line, and we're sitting there saying, and credit to Al Michaels, by the way. And so we talked about broadcasting a little bit before we got on about, how the broadcasting was so. Al Michaels and John Madden. Whoo! Like, that was fun.
They were good.
That was fun going back and watching them, and Al Michaels calls it. He's at the 1 yard line, and they trot out Ken Walter for the punt, and he goes, I don't know, maybe you take a safety here. Like, you could just take the safety, and he was totally right. And guess what happens on the ensuing punt?
Deltha
the
O'Neal.
freaking Broncos blow it, and they end up back at the 15-yard line.
Yeah, and we're talking 22 years ago. And frankly, I hear Al Michaels on Amazon on Thursday nights calling some garbage games, and bless his heart, he hasn't lost anything off his fastball. And now he just is inventing new F's not to give. You know what I mean? Like, he's not the least bit shy about talking about what a terrible game this is, and no one's ready, and Thursday night sucks, and the officials aren't ready, or whatever. And he was doing it back then. And just real quick to talk about kind of the cultural touchstone of the fact this was 22 years ago. You kids out there will never recognize this time in America, okay? Back then, 2003, the biggest box office draw was a guy named Tom Cruise, okay? The celebrity couple everyone was talking about was Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez. You would never recognize that. The biggest record producer was Jay-Z. There were shows on TV like Survivor and Law and Order and CSI. It was a crazy time. It's like, and yet the world is unrecognizable today compared to that.
It's unbelievable.
Oh, wait a minute. Everything stayed the same.
I need whatever Tom Cruise has taken. I'll tell you that much.
Okay. He just as an aside, I wrote about this on Barstool just Monday. He set the world record. The Guinness Book World Record has officially recognized him for setting the record for most flaming parachute jumps with 16.
Love it.
Now, my point is he could have stopped after the first one, and he has retired that trophy. But
That's correct.
He's like, yeah, I'm immortal. I haven't chased death in like a week, so I'm just gonna jump out of a perfectly good helicopter with another flaming parachute. Having said that, so when the Pats were on the 1 yard line, they threw 3 passes, 3 incompletions, and took 15 seconds off the clock. And if my research is correct and my memory is not faulty, there were 3:06 to go when Belichick decides, okay, I'm going to listen to Al Michaels and pulled off a move. And the reason I'm kind of familiar with this, I did a top 20 countdown of Belichick's greatest hits after he got, I won't say fired, after that mutual parting of the ways that they announced at a press conference. And
I believe Chris Martin and Gwyneth Paltrow referred to it as a conscious uncoupling. So,
Perfect. Well, this was my number 17, and only because it was a mid-season game. It wasn't like one of the postseason, but just as impressive moves where he just demonstrated what a galaxy brain he has. This one really established, like, there's something about this guy that sees the game different than everybody else does. Because Al Michaels aside, no one knew that this was coming.
Well, and to your point, kind of leading up to this, there was a lot of question marks about the team and about Belichick. And, some other coaches may have said, you know what, it's a risk. That's a real risk to giving 2 points away. And, we're already losing and we're just going to give them 2 points. Like that's a real risk. Right. And it was, but he, as he always does and was famous for doing, doesn't care what anyone thinks, and went with his gut, and turns out that he was right.
Pat, we were weeks removed from the disaster of, the 31-0 game at the start of the season at Buffalo. Tom Jackson, like you said, just going, they hate their coach. And, the Boston Herald, Kevin Mannix was the beat writer back when being a beat writer was a thing. And he called Belichick duplicitous pond scum. Yeah, like again, there had been one championship in Boston since 1986. So now math is hard, but that's 17 years. And the default setting of everyone was to be negative. You go, okay, well, they got lucky, but he really doesn't know what he's doing. He's gruff. His players can't stand him. And, it took Rodney Harrison midway through the season to go, no one asked us. Right. We love this guy. We love playing for this guy. He recruited me by bringing me to a ground round where, like, you throw peanuts on the floor and, like, kids pay what they weigh to eat. He loved that stuff. The players had not lost any faith in him. So when he tells Lonnie Paxton, just, hike it, Red Mile High, hike it 1.5 miles into the sky. But for whatever, do not fumble it. Do not put it in Ken Walter's hands. Just get rid of the friggin' thing, and we're going to rely on a defense.
Yeah.
And the defense, stepped up. I do want to take a step back, because you mentioned the 3 incompletions that Brady throws. One of these is right to Daniel Graham for what should be a chunk gain, and he totally drops it. This is something I hadn't quite realized with the receiving core of this team. A lot of receivers on this team made some really clutch plays all throughout this stretch. There's also some moments where they have some rough moments, and that I think was one of them, because if Daniel Graham catches that pass, this game might never come down to an intentional
Yep.
safety. The Patriots
Yeah,
might
good.
drive there, or anything else that could happen.
Yeah, Graham did establish himself as the first round draft pick who became a blocking tight end, which is less than ideal. And a short time later, it was Ben Watson, same thing. I will never forget, and not to get off topic, but 2009, that disastrous playoff game against the Ravens, that started off with, an 81-yard touchdown run by Ray Rice, the first play. And it was like 17-0. Okay, let's go. Let's get something going. And Brady hit Benjamin Watson right in the sternum, and it hit the ground. And he's never. This guy, again, his most famous play was a tackle on an interception return. Not ideal when you're talking about a first-round draft pick. So, they struggled muddily even back in those days.
I will say, when I think of Ben Watson, I think of the tackle. I do also think of the back-to-back touchdown catches in the opener in 2009 against the Bills. Brady's first game back from the ACL. That, as a receiver of the football, that's probably his best moment.
And to his credit, he was never a great player. He played for a long time in the NFL.
Yes,
right?
Did.
Professional guy. He ended up coming back to the Patriots after he was with the Saints for a while. So, to his credit. But, certainly not what you were looking for from a first-round pick.
Respected guy, real high character guy, absolutely the one you'd want to have be your next-door neighbor. I will say this about Graham and Watson. If you're judging them against other Patriots tight ends, the fact that they never committed any major felonies like that right there,
right,
that puts them
not bad.
right into
not
the
bad.
Valhalla of Patriots tight ends of the
it's a fair
2000s.
point. That's a fair point, Jerry.
It's a low bar, but they cleared it.
Nevertheless, they do clear it. So to get into what happens after the intentional safety, I should say, Patriots have the free kick. There's some sort of miscommunication with the Broncos. The ball hits the ground. As soon as the ball hits the ground, the ball's live. And so Deltha O'Neal runs back to grab it, ends up getting tackled at the 15. Now the Broncos have the ball at the 15-yard line. And, Matt, you mentioned him before. Ashley Lilly gets open. Now, he's not open by much, but gets open on Ty Law. NFL open on Ty Law, diving at the sideline, drops the ball. I thought, when I first watched it, I thought that Ty Law knocked it away. Watched the replay. Nope, did not knock it away. Actually just simply dropped it. Would have been a nice catch, but the game's on the line. You got to catch the ball. And so the Patriots get the ball back. One of the craziest plays I've ever seen. A Broncos guy comes off with an injury, and he hobbles off with an injury. So there's no injury timeout. Well, Brady thought there was injury timeout. So it was after an incompletion. It was 2nd and 10. He overthrows Troy Brown, I'm sorry. Overthrows Troy Brown on the left. Guy comes off hurt. Brady thinks he has a timeout. So he walks over to the sideline while everyone's in the huddle. Then someone's like, hey, it's not a timeout. He sprints into the huddle. They line up and snap it with a second left and just run it up the gut with Kevin Falk for 0 yards. Now it's 3rd and 10. And you're like, what? They're out of field goal range. And the clock's running, and he hits Kevin Falk on a great pass on 3rd and 10.
Just an absolute back shoulder spinning him around.
Yes. Yep. A fantastic throw away from the pressure. Falk, of course, makes a guy miss. Didn't have to because he had the first down. Makes a guy miss, of course, and then ends up getting tackled. And then on the very next play, he throws the back shoulder touchdown pass to David Givens. And, they were talking about it on I think Michaels and Madden were both talking about it, and they were saying it was a fade stop, right, where he runs the fade. Yeah. Brady throws the back shoulder, and he's like, Deltha O'Neal can't give that up. He's got to know it's coming, right? And so anyways, it was a fascinating look at it. And then Danny Cannell throws up an absolute prayer, and rookie Asante Samuel with an interception. And it was actually funny. Him and Rodney were wrestling for the ball, and Asante ripped it away from him.
Samuel could have done that a few Super Bowls later.
No kidding.
Never get over that. I think some of the numbers here are really interesting. So, okay, the Ken Walter punt went 64 yards. I mean, absolutely flipping the field. The whole machinations of the hitting the goalpost with the upright with the ball meant the Patriots gave up 2 points less than a minute off the clock because they kept burning timeouts, right? So 2 timeouts, 41 yards of field position, and it didn't affect the game at all. And then they start going to Kevin Falk. He has catches. He had 5, 19, and 16 yards, the last of which gave him a 1st and 10 at the Denver 18. And that set up the David Givens field goal. I mean, that is clock management, situational awareness, understanding the field and changing the game writ large, like the way that very few teams would be coached to understand all the little things that go into turning a game around.
Well, and I think with that, one of the things you saw throughout this game, the Patriots offensive line kind of having some issues protecting Brady, and that pops up on the last drive where there's a lot of penetration and Brady able to make plays under pressure, and then some good play calling to have Falk there as an outlet, kind of sucking that pressure in, and then Falk can just go and run and he's got space. So I thought Charlie Weiss did a good job there. And then once you pick up that first down and you can go no huddle, you got the Broncos back on their heels a little bit. That gives you the ability to go for the end zone and try to go win the football game. And that last touchdown, they call it a fade stop. What I'm seeing looking at it with all this hindsight is a quarterback wearing 12 thrown to a receiver wearing 87 like that. This looks like Aaron Rodgers to Jordy Nelson on the back shoulder throw that he popularizes, a decade later and helps him be such a good player. And here's Brady doing that in 2003 to win a game on the road in prime time in one of the toughest environments in the NFL. That connection he had with his receivers, and this is the most yards David Givens had in a game at this point in his career so far. So, I mean, that connection developing is something that would be important for the next 2 years here.
Yeah, and a 7th rounder rather. And Matt, I appreciate it, but when you're talking to this audience and you say number 12 throwing to number 87, no one's flipping to Green Bay on that one. But nevertheless, your point is well taken. Yeah. Pat and I are men of the world. We understand that it goes beyond just, it goes west of the Hudson River, and we know where you stand.
Yes.
Well, it's just, because it's a receiver. David Givens doesn't exactly have that imposing figure to throw the back shoulder fade the way you can do it with Gronk.
Yeah, well said.
Fair point. That's a fair point. Yeah. So, all in all, though, you look at one of these games that becomes a Belichick, and Jerry, I mean, you put it 17th on your list of all-time greatest moves by greatest coaching moves by Belichick, in his career, and that to me is, this was the first time where we really stopped and said, like, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. And even you mentioned the long pass play or the 19-yard pass to Kevin Falk. It was a screen, but Brady keeps it alive, right? And it's a nice play by him. And so it's really kind of that combination of Belichick making the right call at the right time, knowing what he's doing, and then you see the players that are there, right? And you look at the guys on the field and you say, okay, not only do we have the greatest coach of all time, but you're talking about number one, the best player of all time in Brady, but also a ton of incredibly good players, both offensively and defensively. Obviously, the defense is incredible. And when we get to the next game, we're going to talk about how suffocating that defense was to what was at the time a really good Cowboys team. But, when the defense needed to, they stepped up and made some plays. And, it gets the Patriots the ball back. And that's just, when you have all those things working in your favor, that's how you go 28-4 in back-to-back seasons and win 2 Super Bowls. Like, that's just like, that's how you do it,
Yes. And how you have a team, 22 years later, we're still talking about this game, even though it was just like in November, like the whole
Yeah.
season didn't, it wasn't like the fulcrum that turned a losing season into a winning season, but it was just so memorable because that's what we started to realize, okay, you know what? This coach is pretty friggin' special. He's not just like a one-note guy with, he's drawn up some good defenses. He's got great coordinators, and he has a quarterback that maybe is special, but like you said, this team was a wagon on both sides of the ball, particularly on defense, and I know we're going to get into that shortly.
On that, we talk about what Bill is doing it with. There was a graphic they showed during this game. This is week 9. Patriots have now started their 40th different player with Dan Klecko in the lineup in that short of a time span, and they show the records of the team since 2000 that had the most different number of starters. And you've got in 2000 the Jaguars and the Patriots each starting 42 different players, both of those teams with losing records. 2001 the Bills and the Lions each starting 44 different players, combined 5 wins between those two teams. The Bears in 2002, they only won 4 games. They start 49 different players. Halfway through the season, the Patriots have started 40 different players, and they're 6-2. And obviously, they go on to win the Super Bowl. What that team was able to do, despite the injury bug being as bad as it is. And I think someone could be tempted to look at this game and say, wow, Broncos down to their third-string quarterback, guy who's not very good. Their kicker gets hurt during the game, and it still takes a miracle at the end to win it. But the Patriots were kind of having to pull their own miracle every single week just to have enough guys out there with how many players that are hurt. And, you go against this Shanahan offense, which I think we know gave Bill Belichick problems for a long time. And you got to start rookie Dan Klecko at nose tackle because everyone else is hurt against that front. You're trying to make that work, and they do just enough to get a win.
Yeah, and you're in Denver, which even in the best of times was the Patriots version of the last house on the, where there were hillbillies that were going to come and drag you away and like eat your flesh or whatever. And so much of the Patriots history of this decade could have been way better were it not for weird little mistakes happening in that stadium, muffed punts and, just the inability to stop a pass rush. A missed extra point, absolutely, in championship games. And so there's no what's the word I'm looking? There's no mitigating this loss, diminishing it just because Danny Cannell was the quarterback. This was a tough game on the road. They gave up a lot of points. And again, we still didn't know what this team was at that point, but I think this was really where they kind of said, you know what, let's just follow this guy through the gates of hell in a gasoline suit because he knows how to coach tackle football.
100%. And I think too, like it's 21 games in a row, right? 21 games is a whole crap ton of games. That's a lot of games, right? And so to win 21 games in a row, you have to have some wins where you come away and the other team just says like, how did that happen? Right. When we're watching the game, like how are we in this situation and we lost, right? And, or things are stacked up against you and you make a play when you have to. And this is one of those games where like they make that decision, they take the intentional safety, and then the defense turns it on, the offense does the same thing. And you just say like, all right, hey, we were in a tough spot right there, right? You get the ball down at the 1 yard line with 3 minutes left to go in the game. You're thinking this game, hinges on them getting this drive going, and they have the pass to Daniel Graham that he drops, and you're thinking, all right, just isn't our day. Like crap, that's the way it goes, And then to take the safety and still win the game, is really where you sit there and say like, all right, we're pretty impressed with this. And again, it's not all going to be pretty, right? But you win when you got to win, and that's what they did.
I do think we also have to mention in this one, Brady wins Offensive Player of the Week in the AFC after this performance. And this was, people talk about this era of Tom Brady like he's a game manager. And I think what stands out when you rewatch these games is like he kind of is, but that the talent around him is nothing spectacular. The running game is horrendous, and time again, he's backed up having to create big plays by himself. And in this streak, the Tennessee game, he creates a big play touchdown to Detroit Brown.
Mm-hmm.
The Miami game, he creates a big play, game-winning touchdown to Detroit Brown. To open the Cleveland game, he's hitting Bethel Johnson, down the sideline to get you into field goal range, to start that game off with a lead. And then in this one, the throw to Deion Branch down the field is just perfection. And all throughout this game, their best offense was just play action and then let Brady try to find someone down the field. And he created some great plays off of that all game long. That was the offense the whole game.
Right, and that phrase, hitting Deion Branch for a big gain, it will become a recurring theme, I think, not throughout this podcast we're doing, but as you move forward in the series. Like, I kind of think in a lot of ways, Deion Branch might be the most underrated Patriot of the championship era. Like maybe the most underappreciated, most underremembered. Have you been saying that?
Oh yeah, I'm a big Deion Branch guy. Always, I think he might be one of the best receivers to never have 1,000 yards in a season.
Yes, and the perfect example of a guy who grasped this offense, the one that Charlie Weiss brought here and has been continued by Bill O'Brien and Josh McDaniel. It's not for everybody. But he mastered it. And, when they brought him back, for a second go round, instantly, he just knew exactly where he was supposed to be, when he was supposed to be there. Mm-hmm. And so many guys have never been able to even get the first step on that, comprehension. And he perfected it.
Well, 100%. And Gonzo Duke mentions Troy Brown, and Troy Brown's incredible. Don't get me wrong. Yeah. We don't want to take anything away from Troy Brown. Troy Brown gets a lot of due, right? He gets a lot of it. He's in the Patriots Hall of Fame, right? Yeah. And he deserves it. Deion doesn't get that stuff, right? We don't have that same appreciation for Deion Branch that we do for Troy Brown. And I think that's the point you guys are trying to make. And I think it's a great point because you're right. There were so many of those big plays, and he was a big play machine for a long time for the Patriots. And so, you get the touchdown pass to over who was the Pittsburgh safety? I always think it's Ryan Clark, but it's not Ryan Clark.
No,
who was the Pittsburgh safety?
You talking about the 04 AFC Championship game?
No, I'm talking about the safety who was like, the Patriots suck, and we will
guarantee to win against them. And Brady got all up in his grummet.
Anthony Smith, that's it.
Yeah, Smith. I knew it. Common first name, common last name. That's why it's hard to call. Yep, that's it.
So,
well, anyways. The touchdown in this one that the Patriots opened it up with, I think it's basically the same play they run in the AFC Championship game against Pittsburgh the next year to get the touchdown and take the 10-0
lead. David Patton. Yep.
No, that's also Deion Branch in that one.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah. Which is crazy. All right. I think that's it on this game. I can throw a couple notes in here.
Yeah, throw a few notes, and then we'll take a quick ad break, and we'll get to the Cowboys game.
Yeah. I think the most notable thing in sports that happens this week is not in football, but that week prior, LeBron James made his NBA debut. Scores 25 points in his first game, then 21 in his second, 8 in his third. All 3 games kind of happened in that week before this one. But yeah, crazy that, that moment that just happens during this streak. And then they also talk about during the game on Sunday Night Football the night before, Brett Favre breaks his thumb during the game and still throws a block on a touchdown run. Packers end up winning a game in Minnesota, which was huge for them at the time. So that was kind of one of the big stories in the NFL that week.
Yeah. Look at that. There you go. All right, before we take our ad break, just a few quick shout outs here. Paper Wave saying hello, Jerry. Ichigo saying, holy shit, it's Jerry. And Len, we agree, Len, although you probably don't want to go back, that they need to bring you back to the WEI.
Oh, no, bless him. Thank you, Len. EEI and I left on the best possible terms. They offered me a deal. Barstool was a better opportunity. I said, you okay? Let's just shake hands, and I'm not going to go tin cupping it for you. And to please sweeten the deal. It was like, I respect you guys too much. You changed my life. And went back to Barstool, and not for one hot second if I regretted it. Sometimes it's just, sometimes, Peter Gabriel leaves Genesis and they both produce #1 hits.
See? Yeah,
Like,
there you go.
was that not too like an ancient like
Oh,
reference?
listen, I got it. I don't know about everyone else, but I got it.
I
and
got
I
it.
appreciated it. All right, there you go.
My dad gave me enough classic rock when I was growing up to get that one.
It's classic rock now, please. No. I wish Blink 182 is classic rock now. So
I know.
Yeah.
Yep. So, all right, let's take we'll take a quick ad break and then we'll get to the Cowboys game. So this ad, of course, is for Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the best place to turn your sports knowledge into cash. With millions of members, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. Just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 2,000. That's right, 2,000 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. There's only one series left in both playoffs, and the championship is officially on the line. That means time is running out for you to put your final takes to the test on Prize Picks, the best place to cash in on your favorite sports. And again, remember, you can cross-pollinate your rosters over here. You want to get some basketball in there. You want to get some hockey in there. You want to get some esports in there. Maybe throw some baseball in there. Why not? You can do it all. Don't forget, Prize Picks offers Venmo, Apple Pay, MasterCard, and more for quick and easy deposits and withdrawals as well. What you're going to do is download the app Prize Picks, put in the promo code CLNS. When you do that, you play your first $5 lineup, and you get $50 instantly. Don't have to win. You just have to play. Okay? So download the app Prize Picks, put in the promo code CLNS, and get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Matt. You want to set up the second game here that we're talking about, the 6th game of the 21-game winning streak.
Yes, Patriots 7-2, coming out of the bye week, November 16th, 2003, Week 11, back to Gillette Stadium. This time for Sunday Night Football on ESPN. And who's coming to town? It's Bill Parcells and the Dallas Cowboys. Both teams 7-2. Cowboys lost against Atlanta in Week 1. Got shut out at Tampa in Week 8. Other than that, they were cruising. Best defense in the NFL coming into this game. Notably, it's Bill Belichick against Bill Parcells. I pulled some of the stats. Belichick at this point was 3-1 against Parcells. All 4 of those games happened when he is in Cleveland and Parcells is with the Patriots.
One of those playoff game, by the way, in 1994.
Yes, the wild card round in 94. Some notable Cowboys players in this one. Terry Glenn making his return to Foxborough. Starting running back was Troy Hambrick, which is just an all-time running back name. That's fantastic.
Yes.
Quincy Carter at quarterback. Rookie Jason Witten plays in this game, as does Dan Campbell. Those are the 2 tight ends for the Cowboys here.
Yes.
Then a whole
Which they
bunch of
carried
guys.
4.
Yes.
To tell you what Parcells was looking for in this offense, he had 4 flipping tight ends.
Yeah, that was the emphasis. Defensively, a bunch of guys here who ended up winning awards that year. Dat Wynn at linebacker, he was second team All-Pro that year. Dexter Coakley was a Pro Bowler. They had Darren Woodson, Terrence Newman, Roy Williams, who was a first team All-Pro safety. Roy Glover, Joey Galloway is out. And then he's not going to see the field much, but Billy Cundiff does appear in this one. He'd be much more notable for a game in Foxborough, 8 years after this one. But funny to see that name pop up here. I also thought this was interesting. The coordinators for the Cowboys, their offensive coordinator is Maurice Carthon. His son is Rand Carthon, the guy that Mike Vrabel gets into it with in Tennessee that leads to Vrabel being out, which is, Jerry, this is the second time that Rand Carthon's gotten a mention on here because in our first episode, they run a promo for SEC on CBS, and the game they do the promo for is one where Rand Carthon scores a touchdown. Defensive coordinator is Mike Zimmer, that we all know that name, and the assistant head coach and quarterbacks coach is Sean Payton for the Cowboys.
Get that.
So, yeah, a lot of big names. Chilly one in Foxborough, 33 degrees. Patriots favored by 4 points. It was an ugly one. Patriots ended up getting out to a 9-0 lead in the first half. There's a block extra point in there, but you get 2 big plays where Brady beats the blitz, one that set to Branch that sets up a field goal, another one to Givens.
Yep.
That's a touchdown. And then the defense
If I may interrupt real quick, Matt.
down.
So that blitz that you mentioned, so that was Parcells still like his bread and butter. He was running offense, blitzing, and he was calling the plays on offense. Interestingly enough, the one you're talking about, the big gain, was Deion Branch over the middle. Because I rewatched part of this game in preparation for this. The Patriots sent out 2 receivers, and Branch was left wide open over the middle. If that's not just Charlie Weiss playing 5D chess, I don't know what it is. Again, you've got 2 guys to cover, and one of them is all alone in the middle of the field, and it was like 42 yards or some preposterous amount.
Unbelievable. Yep.
Yeah. Well, and that's, the 2 big plays in this one come off of the Cowboys bringing 9, 10 men on a blitz, and it's basically Brady doing a great job recognizing it, creating enough space to get the ball away, and then finding someone down the field. So I think that's where you first start to see, that version of Tom Brady. And then it's end of this game, second half is basically all defense. Patriots get 3 interceptions of Quincy Carter, kind of stuff the Cowboys at every turn, and a lot of bend but don't break here on defense until, just waiting for Quincy Carter to make a mistake, which he does. Patriots get out of this one with the 12-0 win. I do want to circle back to the top, because this is something that I have no experience with as someone who's younger, but you guys probably remember how you felt. What was the feeling about Bill Parcells and Foxborough at the time, and what was the anticipation like leading up to this reunion?
Well, it's always that Parcells has this real hardcore army that will defend him to the last. You know what I mean? The Knights Templar, can defending the Holy Grail from, keeping it away from Indiana Jones or whatever. And I get it to a large extent, but a lot of it is very much media driven. So when the big dust up happened, the cliche was to call it a divorce, and it sort of fits between him and Mr. Kraft. There were a lot of media people forget this rich billionaire guy who doesn't know what he's doing, and he's driving our guy out of town. Well, Parcells has in recent years admitted, I was kind of arrogant and cocky, and I apologize for a lot of what I did. And so when this came up, it was really emotional, and I had already thrown my loyalty behind Belichick, as he did what Parcells had never done. But there were plenty of people who were probably rooting for him. And I imagine, it's hard to gauge the reaction in Gillette that night, but I think it was a lot of okay, let's see if our guy can prove himself against that guy who did that thing that, made us respectable or whatever. And I think this was a turning point. I think if you were on the fence then, you just said, okay, Belichick really has this guy. He's the new, further evolved Bill. He now has the cheat code to the old Bill. And this really proved it, because Parcells was running his offense. He had this team built in his image. And the Patriots, to the extent that they did, kind of coach circles around him.
It's very true. It's very true. And by the way, Gonzo Duke, I think, makes a really good point. It was not the same atmosphere of the Tuna Bowl, right, when he was the head coach of the Jets. Now, Belichick wasn't there yet. It was Pete Carroll. But still, for Patriots fans, it was really difficult to see Parcells as the Jets head coach, right? Now you're looking at it thinking, okay, we feel like we have our guy. And I'll be very honest with you, and you guys that listen to the show know this. I'm a huge Parcells guy. Love Bill Parcells. I also think if you can't admit what he did was disastrous for the organization, I think you're full of it, right? I mean, I think, and Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong here, I think 3 men, my opinion, 3 men saved the New England Patriots. And I won't mention Michael Jackson. Maybe he's number 4. He maybe makes it onto the Mount Rushmore. But in my opinion, 3 men saved the New England Patriots. That's Robert Kraft, obviously. That's Bill Parcells, and that's Drew Bledsoe. And I think obviously, right? Kraft keeps them in New England. But Parcells comes the year before and makes them nationally relevant, right? All of a sudden, the national media is talking about the Patriots again, right? And not like, look at these Patriots, they suck so much. Like, oh my God, the Patriots have like a real coach, right? And then Bledsoe comes, and all of a sudden, all those kids that didn't love the team back then. I remember getting made fun of in middle school for wearing Patriot stuff, right? Back in the early 90s, right? And so Bledsoe turns, brings everyone together and makes them fans of the Patriots. He was a lovable guy, and he was a warrior on the field, right? And so all of a sudden now everyone's a Patriots fan. And Parcells does what he does, and it's, a lot of people think that's unforgivable, and I don't blame them for thinking that way, right? I personally, I think it's forgivable. I'm happy he's going to the Hall of Fame this year, but I understand it. I get it, right? And of course, Bledsoe gets replaced by the greatest player in the history, maybe of team sports, and so it's not really a fair comparison. But those three guys, in my opinion, are the reason that the New England Patriots are where they are right now. And without those three guys, they save Patriots football in New England, in my personal opinion. And so I have that soft spot for Parcells. I think at the time when you're going into this game, of course it's a big moment because, Parcells is the protege Belichick was Parcells' protege, and you're looking at it saying, okay, we think we have our guy, right? And now he's going against his mentor, and he's got a good record against him already. But now this is the team. What can he do against Parcells? And for him to then go out and, I don't want to say coach circles around him, but he shut down that offense. I mean, the Cowboys got into Patriots territory. They passed the 50-yard line 3 times. One time they got to the 48, really ended up being the 43 after Jerry running into the kicker. Think I was running into the kicker, not roughing the kicker, but running into the kicker, which gave them 5 extra yards to the 43. Still punted on the first drive of the game, the very first drive of the game. The last 2 were in the fourth quarter when they got into the red zone and Quincy Carter threw an interception. And so, they did nothing all game long. And that's because Belichick knew it was coming from Parcells and shut it down. And, you could say, well, Quincy Carter sucks as a quarterback. You can say all that. That's fine. They were 7-2 going into the game. They were a good team. And so you walked away from this game thinking okay, last week, Belichick proved that he's got balls of steel, right? And this week, he proved that it doesn't matter what Bill Parcells does. He might be a Hall of Fame coach. It don't matter. He can't come in here and beat us. And it gave you kind of ultimate faith in what Belichick had.
Sure. It's so, there's a lot of backstory to this, and that's what made this game more fascinating than just what happened during the 60 minutes, including, you said the bad blood. When he went to the Jets, that was like a rent in the space-time continuum to have gone to the Jets. And then we found out that he was literally in the hotel room in New Orleans for the Super Bowl against the Packers, making phone calls on the Patriots. This was a time when you had long distance charges, racking up long distance charges on behalf of the Jets, trying to sign free agents or whatever. So that was bad blood. By the time he he leaves the Jets, and then Belichick ends up sticking his coach's shoe right up the butts of the whole Jets organization by coming to the New England and winning a championship. So now, it's very much George Costanza. I've got a hand, Parcells had hand, and then Belichick had hand. Now who's going to have hand? And then by the time he took the job with the Cowboys, there was kind of the sense okay, he was retired. He was done. He just wanted to go play the tracks in, Florida, bet on the Nags or whatever. And Jerry Jones threw him a preposterous amount of money. And he's like, all right, Jerry Jones is an imbecile, but I'll do it, whatever. And I'll build a team on my image. But I think for him, it was kind of like when you retire and you just kind of take that part-time job, you're out on a cop's pension, but you work at the golf course. That's kind of the general sense. I wasn't saying, oh, this Bill Parcells, I want him to I want him to lose. There's just like, okay, I want the Patriots to beat him to kind of show that they've moved on without him, And I think a testament to Parcells is Terry Glenn got an absolute reboot for all his bad behavior under Pete Carroll. Belichick came in and said, okay, clean slate. Whatever fines you had to pay, whatever suspensions, that's over with. And he still effed it up. You still want to be a Patriot? I did. did. Well, what did he want ultimately? To go play for the coach who treated him like hot garbage, called him a she or whatever. And you realized, okay, he's that guy who wants tough coaching, whatever. He respects Parcells and he played for him. And he, this was his chance to stick it to the Patriots. As I recall, he had one catch for 8 yards.
That is correct. Yeah. By the way, speaking of Terry Glenn, this was not Terry Glenn's first return to Foxborough Stadium or to Gillette Stadium. In 2002, he visited Gillette Stadium as a member of the Green Bay Packers. And the Packers won 28-10. I think he had 3 catches for 19 yards in that game. Was a complete non-factor. By the way, Glenn did have 1 catch, and the Patriots had as many catches when Quincy Carter targeted Terry Glenn as Terry Glenn did, because Tyrone Poole, one of the interceptions that Quincy Carter threw, was thrown to Terry Glenn, and Tyrone Poole picked it off.
Yeah. When I think you look at the X's and O's of this game, defensively, this is a Belichick, masterclass. And this feels like, the same type of game plan we saw from him for years. A lot of it is getting the right cornerback room so you can play man coverage when you need to play man coverage, and then some really well-designed zones. And, there's a bunch of plays in this game where Quincy Carter's trying somebody deep in whatever corner's out there. A lot of the time it was actually Tyrone Poole. It's just running stride for stride with Terry Glenn or Antonio Bryan or whoever it is. And there's just no space. There's nothing for the quarterback to do. And they did a very good job of keeping the quarterback contained, not letting him beat you with his legs. And it's the same Belichick game plan we saw for so long against the mobile quarterback that can't beat you through the air. That worked for forever. Ty Law also fantastic in this game. He had Glenn's number, I think.
And had been playing hurt like most of the season. Had a bum ankle. He was seen to limp off the field. They started saying, let's just target him. And he made them pay in spite of it. I'm as guilty as anyone when it comes to saying it's the coaching and it's Belichick and his system and his game plans and what he, empowered Romeo Crennel to do or whatever. But the players on this defense really need to be singled out. I mean, Richard Seymour was all over the place on that. It's hard for a guy who is a defensive lineman who doesn't have a high sack total to make it to the Hall of Fame. But it showed that we still live in a just and sane universe, that he got in the Hall of Fame where he belongs. But you had Ted Washington in the middle. Bruschi at the height of his powers, Willie McGinnis at the height of his powers, and Mike Vrabel was running around the field, pressuring Carter, flushing him out of the pocket, causing other people to make plays. Like that defense was the likes of which, given the current rules, we may never see again another defense as shut down as the 2003 Patriots.
Well, it's certainly true. Go ahead, Matt.
You mentioned Teddy Bruschi in there. There's a 4th and 1 play. The Cowboys are down 9-0, 9 minutes left in the fourth quarter. They're at midfield, 4th and 1. They decide they're going to go for it. And Bruschi gets free through the B gap and as a misdirection run, and he never bites on the misdirection. He hits Hambrick 2 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he goes absolutely nowhere.
Yeah.
And that was, I think, kind of the real moment where you knew, okay, it's 9-0. In theory, there's a chance the Cowboys can come back, but stopping them at midfield there and being able to get the ball back, what felt like that's it. And then, the next time the Cowboys get the ball, it's that pick to Tyrone Poole. And I think that really, really seals it.
Yeah. Jerry, you talk about that 0-3 defense, right? And we talked about this with Matt Chatham. going into that Tennessee game, right? And because we talked about this already, the Patriots were missing injured for this game. Ted Washington, Roosevelt Colvin, Ted Johnson, Mike Vrabel, Willie McGinnis. So that's 5 really good players. Their defense in that game included Richard Seymour, Ty Warren, Roman Pfeiffer, Teddy Bruschi, Ty Law, Eugene Wilson, and Rodney Harrison. So you got 5 potentially superstar players that are injured, and you're rolling out that defense still. They were just an absolute wagon on defense.
Yep. And early in the game, Lloyd made a Lloyd, listen to me. Rodney Harrison made a tackle, and they said, and that's his 82nd of the year, and it leads the team. I'm sorry, what? What was the date of this? November what?
November 16th. Unbelievable.
82.
82 tackles. Now, as a general rule, when you're the safety and you have that many tackles, it's a bad sign. Young Jerry had rooted for some of the worst Patriots teams of all time. And my favorite player on one of them was Tim Fox, number 48. When I played freshman high school football, I got 48. We had red jerseys, whatever. He led the team in tackles, which is an awful sign because he was the free safety, which means we called that team the Red Sea defense because they parted in such a way that Israelites in sandals could have walked right through them for a touchdown. But here's Rodney Harrison all over the bloody field, blitzing, being a run force player, fighting off fullbacks or whatever. And again, we were almost in a riot because they let Lawyer Malloy go. And, it took a while for people to go, kind of Belichick was right. Maybe you made the right call.
Little did we know. And I still say, I know, Jerry, you agree with this. I still say Rodney, to me, it's a disgrace that he's not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. It's just an absolute disgrace. He's one of the only 30 guys in the history of the NFL. It's 2. It's him and Ray Lewis. And so he does not get the credit that he deserves. And it's just it's bad. And I know that the media didn't like him. I know a lot of other teams didn't like him. I get that. He was a phenomenal player for a long time.
When they call him a headhunter. Yeah. Okay, so why don't we take the guys who have reputations of being violent hitters out of the Hall of Fame? Well, you know what? You're gonna have a lot of empty space in there.
Right. What I always said
all the time, you want to tell me Ray Lewis didn't hit hard? You're gonna tell me Warren Sapp didn't hit hard? Again, right. It's a game of violence. Rodney Harrison was an absolute warrior, the ultimate guy that when he's on someone else's team, you can't stand him, and as soon as he shows up in yours, you're going, what's his jersey number? I'm buying one right now.
Yeah. Well,
I love that he transitioned to media and immediately became one of the best in the business at that. I'll die on the hill of defending Rodney Harrison.
100%. And you look at what the opening days of 03 training camp, and he's trying to take Troy Brown's head off, right, in practice. And, and I just think if he had played 10 years earlier, right, he'd be celebrated as the greatest safety in the history of the NFL, right? I mean, you look at how people talk about Ronnie Lott. Ronnie Lott was the same type of player. He just played 10 years earlier. So the rules were different, and it's just that's the frustrating part where it's if he had just played a few years earlier. I mean, Jack Lambert, for God's sakes, is one of the dirtiest players in the history of the NFL. He nearly killed Darryl Stingley. He paralyzed Darryl Stingley in a preseason game.
Yeah, Jack Tatum.
Jack Tatum, I'm sorry. Jesus, not Jack Lambert.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And
you know what I mean? He paralyzes Darryl Stingley in a preseason game and has no hard feelings about it whatsoever. Just goes on about his day like it's no big deal. And that guy is celebrated as one of the greatest players ever.
Yep, exactly. And that was an absolute cheap shot. And Harrison was he was a hard hitter. Listen, Mel Blount, they changed the way the game is officiated because he was so good at his job. And so you're right. And Harrison absolutely came in as a first year guy and set a tone and made himself part of not just like adapted to the Patriots, but gave them part of his own personality that carried them all the way to the championship. Spoiler alert, brought him to the championship. So this team on the whole, I'm kind of going by memory, but I believe they had 5 shutouts on the season. They had there's a 3 shutouts straight there. Okay, but 5 games at home consecutively where they didn't give up a touchdown. There was like a 3-point game in there. There was a 6-point game in there. And they would have extended that streak to 6, except in the fourth quarter of a blowout win, like Jacksonville got like a total garbage time touchdown. But that's a phenomenal record. To get in the 21st century of football, to get 3 shutouts in a season and 5 games where you keep a team out of the end zone, that's phenomenal. And to have shut out this Cowboys team, that was not a terrible team. They were built on, the run game, Parcells again calling the plays. They had an adequate quarterback, and they had all those, Jason Witten emerging as a talent. Terry Glenn was no slouch, and they barely let them into the red zone. That's a phenomenal
Jerry, that's a great point. To your point, after October 5th, so starting October 12th against the Giants, which we've already talked about that game, the second game of the streak, the Patriots allowed until the playoffs, of course. The Patriots allowed 1 touchdown in the regular season at home, and that touchdown came against the Jaguars with 3 minutes and 22 seconds left, with the Patriots up 27-6.
Blowout city too in that game. I remember being disappointed about that in a way that was like, I shouldn't care this much, but to have extended that touchdown-less streak. I know that's not a word, but that streak without giving up a touchdown would have been great. And the season ended with them bookending the 31-0 loss at Buffalo, with them beating Buffalo 31-0, where Buffalo took a shot at the end zone at the end of the game and the Pats knocked it down. It was like, okay, there's something special about here. There's serendipity going on with this team to have revenged that 31-0 loss with a 31-0 win. Okay, I forgave the garbage touchdown to Jacksonville.
So that game ended with a Larry Izzo interception in the end zone. And I think I celebrated, because that was in my end zone. I sit in the north end zone where the lighthouse is. I think I celebrated that interception as hard as I celebrated like the divisional win against the Titans. Like we were so amped about the fact that it was 31-0, and like we wanted them to keep that shutout so bad. And the Patriots are running their backups out there, but we're like, we don't care. Like, just stop them. And Izzo gets the pick in the end zone. It's incredible.
Yeah.
And everyone in the stadium was there. Like, no one left early because that was what they wanted. This was, okay, vengeance is ours. This was really the early stages of Belichick building a pyramid of skulls upon which to put his throne, and he's never left it.
That's correct. All right, Matt, what do you got?
That season, when they were not playing someone who won the MVP award that season at home, they allowed 2 touchdowns. Vinny Testaverde scored 1 touchdown on them in week 3 against the Jets, and there's the garbage time touchdown against the Jaguars. And in those games, so we're taking away the games against the Titans and the Colts, they scored a defensive touchdown against the Jets. They scored a defensive touchdown against the Giants, and they scored a defensive touchdown against the Dolphins. So when they were not playing Steve McNair or Peyton Manning that season, the defense at home, the defense scored more touchdowns than the opposing offense did, which is just ridiculous.
Have mercy. And then they went on in the postseason to beat the co-MVPs in the NFL that year, and you just mentioned them, McNair and Peyton Manning. Forget who, Peyton Manning, whatever happened to him. But the fact that they beat both those guys who were both the MVPs, and that was just one of many league MVPs that they destroyed during the Belichick era, beginning with, Marshall Faulk and Kurt Warner, and then those two, and then Manning again, and it just went on and on and on. And for a lot of years, there was just like this team plays their best against the best people and reduces them to, and the best coaches, and reduces them to something less than they've been.
Yeah, totally true.
Yeah, and going back to the Rodney Harrison, Eugene Wilson thing, you look at first of all, throughout this whole sequence, both of those two safeties, like in every single game, both of them are making a hit that makes you go, ooh. Like, it's constant. At the end of this game, second to last play, Eugene Wilson, game's out of hand. He's still lighting guys up out there. He ends up getting a penalty for hitting a guy, which not necessarily a great call, but that was clearly the ref saying, hey, this game's like done. Let's chill a little bit. It did make me laugh that on the last play, Ty Law picks it and then decides to run out the clock, and then he starts laddering the ball to Tyrone Poole. But you tell Belichick's pissed on the sideline. He's talking to Romeo Crennel. The only word, like, you can read his lips a little bit, and the only words you can see him say are Jesus Christ. So he is mad about what just happened. Answering the media hysteria, you do get the two Bills shaking hands, a little embrace after the game. So everyone was waiting for that moment. This was just the second time in team history the Patriots started a season 8-2. The only other time was 1978. It was just the third time in his career that Parcells got shut out. It happened once in I don't have it written down here, but happened once earlier in his career in the 90s, I believe, and then twice this season at that point. So that was kind of, that is not something that happened. And he's a defensive coach, but this is not something that happened to him. And then they ended this by showing a graphic that I thought was very interesting to look back on. They did a poll of who should win Coach of the Year at that point. And this is what the leaderboard looks like halfway through 2003. Parcells, the runaway favorite, with 35% of the vote. Marvin Lewis of the Bengals with 25% of the vote. Dick Vermeil of the Chiefs with 16%. John Fox of the Panthers with 14%. And Belichick with 10%. A little foreshadowing with those last two names.
Yep.
Yeah,
interestingly enough,
7-2. But what, they were just kind of going, it doesn't really count for anything. Like, again, he still hadn't had that name recognition. I mentioned to you guys before we started taping, like, I watched a good portion of the original broadcast, and if you don't remember the era of Joe Theismann and Paul McGuire,
don't go back.
Congratulations, I am. It's not something you want. It's not quite like going back to look at the film of the Great Depression, but it's not that far off the map. People living in Hoovervilles and starving in soup lines. But anyway, they talked about like little stories in their nonstop jibber jabber. Was so Eugene Wilson had been moved from cornerback to safety, and Belichick was asked about it, and they said, "Well, why would you make that move?" And he said, "You know what? Because I don't want Eugene Wilson standing next to me on the sideline." Just like great quote. Like if I keep my corner, he's not playing corner. I'm getting his ass over here. And the same thing, like them just going, Belichick 7-2, but he's not really getting the respect. But that he's, he's such a genius at it. Well, maybe they were just a little bit ahead of the curve. I don't know. But again, it very much goes back to the lineup that he had put together on that side of the field, from Richard Seymour. Was Ty Warren a rookie then?
He was a rookie that year. Yeah. Yep.
Right. Because they had made the trade with Bledsoe. Exactly. And it took him a little while to establish himself. But good Lord, what a front three that was. And then the next year, Washington was replaced by a guy you might be familiar with named Vince Wilfork.
He's okay. Decent player.
At number 21 in the draft.
Yeah.
He let Washington go, had a huge gaping hole in the middle of the defense, and the rest of the NFL just decides to just pass Vince Wilfork. They're decade-long nose tackles, exactly what they need, along to them and stuff, and then just makes them even possibly a better team the following year. It's insane.
Unbelievable. Your broadcaster note, I think my least favorite broadcaster of all time is Dan Fouts. I'll never forget Monday Night Football. They're going through the game and everyone's breaking stuff down. Oh, this guy against that guy, and they go, "What do you think, Dan?" And he goes, "Well, guys, I think the team that can move the ball up and down the field the most consistently is going to win." And they were just like, "Okay, thanks." Like it was like, "What the hell are you talking about, dude?"
Way to earn your money there, Dan.
But on the Parcells Coach of the Year thing, I do think it's interesting to note the Cowboys had been 5-11 for 3 straight seasons before he got there. Okay. At this point, they were 7-2. They finished the season at 10-6. They went 10. Belichick coached there. Parcells coached there for 4 years. They went 10-6, 6-10, and then 9-7 2 years. 4 different starting quarterbacks: Quincy Carter, then Vinny Testaverde, then Drew Bledsoe, then Tony Romo. And then, of course, he leaves, Wade Phillips takes over, and then, they have the whole Romo era and everything else. But, he turns over that roster just like he was good at doing, moves up to the front office right after he's done coaching for a few years there too. But it was a really kind of a fantastic turnaround for them pretty quickly with Parcells. The wheels kind of fall off, as you get towards the end of the season. But, at that point, at 7-2, people looking at it saying, wow, they've already won more games than they did, the last 3 years. That's pretty crazy. So I can certainly see why they were thinking that.
I've forgotten about all those 5-win seasons. And that was kind of him after he left the Giants. He became like that Mr. Fix-It. Like, take the 1-15 Patriots, take the number 1 pick, make them respectable. He did the same thing with the Jets, right? He goes there. There's the number 1 pick. Yeah, Keyshawn Johnson.
Keyshawn. Yeah. But
there we go.
It just didn't last. Yeah. He couldn't last long.
Yeah, I think he just was one of those guys with no tolerance for all the process. You know what I mean? After a while, people would just get on his last nerve, and that certainly happened in New England. And look, his legacy in New England, look, he's in the Hall of Fame, the Pats Hall of Fame. I wouldn't necessarily put him in there. Definitely Canton, not so much Foxborough. It was not the upward trajectory that we remember it to be. There was like a big setback in there where he said by his own volition, he said, I kind of was like, I got fat. I was kind of disinterested. And then I decided to get back in shape and re-energize myself. And that's who you get that Super Bowl year. And he took him to the Super Bowl. I can make the same case that if he's in the Hall of Fame, then we should have, I'm fleeking. He took him to the
Raymond Berry, right?
Ray Berry. Thank you for having my senior moment. Who had a better record, took him to more playoffs. Had a better playoff record, but that's water under the bridge. Like Mr. Kraft decided to do the take the high road. Parcells isn't getting any younger. Let's not let old grudges take over, like old war heroes who fought on opposite sides. Let's have beers and cigars and talk about the old days. And I really think that's what motivated him to be in the Pats Hall of Fame. I think it's just both guys decide to be gracious as they get older in life, and there's no reason to burn all the calories it takes to hold a grudge. So it'll be fun when he gets in. I'm really looking forward. His speech is going to be absolutely electric.
Oh yeah. Yep.
That'll be fun.
That's for sure.
Season for Parcells, the Cowboys, it ends in Carolina. They end up losing in the wild card round to the Panthers in the first step of that Panthers Super Bowl run. Panthers do that. They go to St. Louis. They go to Philadelphia on the way to play in the Patriots. So, their season ends against the same team as it did for the Patriots, but in a very different result there. One other minor note on this game, but I felt like it was worth mentioning. This is the debut of the Patriots silver jerseys, those alternate jerseys they wore for a couple years there.
I wanted to bring it up. You got me.
Breaking them out at home. I actually found the press release. I think it's the press release from when they were first unveiled, and they were talking about how they liked breaking these out because you're facing Dallas that year, and you also have Miami, and it was we got an alternate jersey that we can wear at home and make these teams have to wear their color jerseys that they don't like wearing, which we're going to get to that. Another 12-0 Patriots win at home in the silver jerseys against Miami later in the season.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Anything else, Matt? Any other final notes here on that game?
Well, I have not on the game, but for that week, I mentioned Marvin Lewis and Dick Vermeil in the second and third in the Coach of the Year. I think the reason that's the case, the Chiefs were undefeated coming into that week. They end up losing to the 4-5 Bengals, coached by Marvin Lewis, which is probably why that name pops up here. Crazy game looking at it. Peter Warwick had a 68-yard punt return touchdown for the Bengals, and then caught a 77-yard pass from John Kitna in the Bengals' upset victory of the Chiefs. So just throwing that old name out there for you guys.
As all the Jaws fans in my fantasy football league back then, and yes, I was in fantasy football since the mid '80s. Kids,
Love it.
He didn't invent the world, okay? But we used to call him. We're all Jaws fans. We called him the Little Kitna Boy. $3,000 reward for the shark that killed the little Kitna Boy.
I love it.
Yeah, that's a guy who's a footnote to history for sure.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. One other game that week that I had to go actually look up video clips from because I could not believe what I was reading in the box score. Jets-Colts that week. Colts at home. They go up 31-17 in the third quarter. Jets come all the way back to tie it at 31, also in the third quarter. And then you see on the box score, Hunter Smith 21-yard touchdown. For those who don't remember, Hunter Smith is the punter for the Colts. They end up driving into field goal range. Drive stalls. It's like 4th and 2. They bring out the field goal unit. They run a fake punt to Hunter Smith. No one touches him. He just picks it up and runs into the end zone, 21 yards. And that goes on to be the game-winning touchdown in that one. Hunter Smith, also a name that ends up coming up for the Patriots later in this season. He was running backwards in that one, though, not forwards.
Yeah, some interesting tidbits over there. I like that. This has been so much fun, Jerry. We really appreciate this. Has been great. You can't go though because you have to plug all of your stuff because you are you've written many leather-bound books, and you need to plug those and tell everyone. I mean, everyone knows where they can read you and everything else like that. But nevertheless, let us know what you're doing out there.
And my apartment smells of rich mahogany. I'm friends with Merlin Olsen. Yeah, so look, my life's pretty much an open book. I'm on Barstool Sports every day, just like humping away. They bless them. They just let me ramble on about anything I want. The Patriots are my focus, obviously, and I wouldn't have it any other way, especially now in what I'm calling the summer of hope. I was calling it the summer of optimism, but I said it sort of rolls off the tongue better. The summer of hope.
I agree.
After 2, 4, and 13 seasons, enough of like just existential dread. I'm just jazzed about this. Written some books from Darkness to Dynasty about the early days of the Patriots, which the book ends. You shouldn't give away the ending of a story, but it worked okay for Titanic, right? Maybe people right. all knew what that was coming. So it ends with like 2001, and then another book, and I actually have a copy next to me for research purposes. 6 Rings, available wherever fine books is sold. And it's just, if I couldn't make these stories entertaining and like how much like I'm seeing it from a Patriots fan point of view, I'm not some journo. I'm not trying to pass myself off as like a, some objective, straight down the middle guy. Like I'm 100% like, I love it when they win. It kills me when they lose, but I'm never leaving this team no matter what. And so I'm on Barstool. I'm on Twitter at X at Jerry Thornton 1, and I'm not going anywhere as long as this team continues the upward trajectory that we're on, by God. And I feel good about this going forward. And the best part about what I do is being able to like talk to guys who are like-minded and have you guys generously ask me to be on your podcast. And this has been a blast. I love talking about this. So thank you very much.
This is a ton of fun. I will say, Mike Reese once called you the most widely read Patriots reporter, and I agree with it. You, and I will say, I feel like you gave a voice to the fans, right? And you made it okay to be a fan of of the team, and then also write about them, right? And none of this like journalistic stuff. And listen, I write an article for Pat's Pulpit every Sunday or every Monday, I guess. We podcast about the team. We do all the stuff. I have season tickets and I'm at every game. I can't imagine being in the press box. I'd lose my mind if I was in the press box. Like, I want to be out in the crowd cheering on the team. That's what I do, right? And I try to be objective at times, but it's not going to always be objective. It is what it is. But you were the first one to kind of really do that in the media, and show everyone that, like, hey, it's okay. Like, we're fans of the team. We can be fans of the team and still talk about it, and that's fun. And so I appreciate that.
I appreciate you picking up on that, Pat, because, real quick, in the early days of Barstool, that's kind of how we saw ourselves. Like, we were the alternative to the Boston journos who were still talking about this region, this, sports city, like it was the 90s. Right. Everyone sucks. No one's as smart as us. Like, okay, that was working when you were talking about Rick Pitino, right. Jimmy Williams with 1M or whatever. But we're in a pretty successful era, and we were like sitting there going, look, we're just being our authentic selves. We're like happy when they win. Again, we're rooting for them to win. I'm not trying to pretend that I'm fair and balanced. Like, I hate their enemies and I love our allies, and so I think that really helped the upward trajectory of Barstool. Even back when we were like a newspaper, the most gratifying thing was people say, hey, I read you guys and I go, that's exactly what I'm thinking. But you would listen to like WEI and everything was, they're idiots and they don't know what they're doing. And if only they were smart as the guy with the degree from the Connecticut School of Broadcasting or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
And anyway, I don't begrudge them. WEI hired me. They let me leave the working for the Massachusetts court system, and I have always appreciated it. But Barstool is where I've always belonged, and I'm thrilled for all the success of all the Barstool guys. And frankly, I'm not qualified to do any other job. So it's this or I'm wearing a vest at Walmart and saying welcome. And I wouldn't last a day at that job either. So thanks, fellas. Thanks for your kind words. And especially, from Mike Reese, for goodness sakes, he's the best Patriots reporter there is. So for him to say that means the absolute world.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, that's it. Hey, thanks so much, Jerry. Thanks again. We appreciate it. And thanks to the chat for tuning in. We appreciate you guys. And we'll be back later on in the week going over the next two wins. Another special guest coming in. Someone who actually has the opposite of Jerry, didn't live through any of these games. And so we'll get a completely opposite perspective of these next two games. And again, another very memorable game coming up in those two. So make sure you tune in for that. And thanks for tuning in, everyone. Be good to each other and go Pats.